terms of like the things that you've seen, obviously in terms of acting, which is another world, and I think acting has always been great at being one of the first. The acting, music usually leads the way in terms of like cultural shifts. Sport does the same at cultural shifts, because ultimately you're almost, the stories end up creating stars and moments and narratives that shape things. So, you know, there's usually a lot more integration in acting. Have you ever observed anything in acting or in casting or roles that you've been put out for? And, you know, have you ever gone to a casting for something and seen that there's black people and white people up for the same role? Or has it always, you know, those type of things I think people would never really know?
Well, it's an interesting, the whole, that whole kind of area is interesting, and people are trying to find their way through it now, because there was a thing about 4 years ago, 5 years ago, that people were calling it colourblind casting in a very sort of progressive way, and then that changed, and it was like, wait, colourblind casting is deeply problematic anyway, because that then you're talking about not acknowledging a particular individual's culture and ancestry and heritage. So then it became colour conscious casting, which I think is a much more inclusive idea. But it is funny, isn't it? Because up until relatively recently, I might have gone, yeah, I know, it's really great, but like, you'd want to cast this film, but the fact is, historically, I mean, I wouldn't have made that argument, because it's a dumb argument and nothing changes that way. But what I'm trying to get to is this idea that, like, Bridgerton, for example, has completely exploded all of those myths. It's like, yeah, we'll just do a period drama and cast whoever we want, as in fact did Hamilton, you know. And suddenly you go, oh right, okay, it's entirely doable, and no one needs to make those excuses anymore. Now I did a TV show called The Cafe that I wrote, and I was in it, and I wrote it, and I, you know, cast it. And in the second series, it was set in Weston-super-Mare in Somerset. And 2010 we made it, and we were like, do you know what, it was about 3 generations of women trying to keep a cafe open, and it was a sort of gentle comedy. And the second series we were like, I can't believe that we haven't got a black character in, we really should write a black character, and we did. And I cast my friend Cobner Holbrook Smith. Do you know him? He played
Yeah,
Cobner's a legend, and he played, I was in a play with him a couple of years previously, and we cast him, and he was brilliant. And what we wanted to do, as forward-thinking liberals making this show, we wanted to, we were like, the thing is, there's almost like no black people in Weston-super-Mare, so if he arrives in the cafe, there will be, somebody will have an opinion on that, so we have to address that. So what we had him doing, he arrives in the cafe and he's in Weston-super-Mare, and he's doing community service. Now, but that's a deliberate, like, we were selling people a misdirection there, because the idea is he was doing community service, but you find out in later episodes that it's not because he's a criminal, it's because he beat up, I think it was like he beat up 3 neo-Nazis who were attacking someone outside a gay nightclub, right? So technically he's a criminal because he's doing community service, but the idea
he's also a hero.
We're going to confound your expectations, he's not what you, this is not what you think, and so on and so on. I look back at that now and I go, I don't know if it was the right way to go. What might have been the right way to go is just to have him come in and just be in the world, you know, and not gone, well, he's black, so we've got to, do you know, I wish I'd just gone, well, if in Weston-super-Mare somebody would have said something, that's their problem. No, I don't mean Weston-super-Mare. If anyone's listening from Weston-super-Mare, I mean those characters.
No, we are.
Yeah, exactly. Never got Weston-super-Mare. No, they've been very good to me, Weston-super-Mare. Do you know what I mean? And that was 11 years ago now. And I look back and I go, I don't know if it was the right. It was certainly the most well-intentioned, and I don't think it was. It's not for me to say what's offensive, but I don't think it was offensive. But I wish that instead we'd have just not even made any deal of it, and he'd have come in and had a whole different storyline.
And I think that's a common thing. And so, how intentional are you with casting? How intentional are you with storylines and contextualizing people? Do you want to be like, hey, look, we're addressing this thing, or do you just want it just to be slipped in and be normal? So I think for every Bridgerton, I think there's like the other side of it is like a Scarlett Johansson who believes she can play any person on the planet, and it's perfectly fine. And I think, and I think in essence, I can understand the argument from an actor's point of view. In terms of like wanting to play anything, you want to be able to play a mermaid, you want to be a voice in a cartoon, you want to play any woman of any kind. But I also then think it's like, the impact on the people watching and the impact of the conversation that is being driven. It was incredibly self-centered to only consider your desire to act above everything else that was being said and done. And I think there'll be plenty of time. Scarlett will work until the very last day that she chooses to. And so, she can pick anything she wants to. She's not on the realm of like struggling actor mode where, she's talking about her freedom to perform any context that she wants. And I was like, what a fantastic joy and privilege that you can just play an East Asian woman in a film, knowing that there are East Asian women who credibly could play themselves very, very well. And I think, when we're talking about an attempt to do something thoughtful, you may get it wrong, and that's, that happens. And I think also just like, I call it about being on the court. If you're on the court on the issue of racism, you may make mistakes, but who are you when you get caught with the mistake? And like, did you do enough due diligence to ensure that you didn't? Cobner's a great guy, so I assume he had some sort of viewpoint and input on it. He probably bought into the idea on some level, so therefore you've spoken to him about it, or you may have spoken to someone about it and landed at the conclusion. And it may not have worked, but I think once you hold your hand up and be like, look, we tried and it was the wrong thing to try, but my next attempt will be more based on what I've learned and understood from that, and you just keep going, that's really, really powerful. But I think when you just own this kind of like space and you just decide on behalf of everybody else what your approach is going to be, I think that's when it becomes really problematic, because we would never do that for gender, we would never do that around LGBTQIA+. We would actually listen to the community and take a stance, and if you get it wrong, as if you dropped something in your mum's house, you'd be like, oops, I'm so sorry, and you'll clean it up. You wouldn't just be like, yeah, but I was getting my own food, and so I was getting my own food, yeah, so give me credit, clean that up, Mum.
Yeah, no, I know. I think, people say that people, I think, trot this out as too easily as an excuse, and I think it's not an excuse, but it's also, it can be context. Like people say the world was a different place. Now, that only goes so far, because you can't have been mistreating people because the world's a different place. But you can, when I look back at that idea with casting Cobner and writing that storyline, I don't think it was offensive, and it was certainly well intentioned, but also the world was a different place, and Cobner did buy into that very happily. He was like, yeah, it's lovely because I get to come in and I get to show, and certainly Cobner didn't flag it up. Now, it's only then when you look back you go, well, maybe Cobner didn't flag it up because at the time we lived in a world in 2010 where he was like, this isn't really something we flag up, we just
do
go, thanks for your good intentions, and we take the money and we pay our mortgage and we go, thank you, and it's that kind of thing as well that I think well-intentioned white people have to now think and just go talk to people like you without going, please teach me about what race is. Do you know what I mean? You've got to try and find a way to because the problem is if they don't, then it's not enough to go, well, I think it's awful now, but I better not say anything because otherwise nothing changes, right? So yes, the world was a different place. I don't think we did anything massively offensive, but I probably would think differently about that now. Or even cast somebody first and then consult them about how they thought about it first. I think we'd written the part first. Listen, there's another thing. I don't want anyone to sort of pick up on this and then have a massive headline about it. But yeah, there's another thing about casting that we should talk about, but I almost don't want to get into too much because it's I think there's a whole hour on this, and I want to do a different conversation. I don't know if you remember, but there was this outcry when about 5 years or 4 years ago, there was a short, 25-minute comedy short made by Sky, where Brian Cox played Marlon Brando, Stockard Channing played Elizabeth Taylor, and Joseph Fiennes played Michael Jackson in 2001 on September the 11th.
Yeah.
Well, I produced that. I cast it. Well, I was part of that decision.